Welcome to the Solid Verbal. And now, Dan and Ty.
Dan Rubenstein, welcome back to the pod, my great and good friend. As you know, next week, gonna be starting up previews.
Yes, sir.
This is our last episode before we dive in officially to the college football preseason. We're gonna lead off our preview coverage by doing what we did last year, the intro to the 2025 season. Then we're going to give you the rest of the week off.
Yep.
But when we come back from the July 4th holiday, we flip the switches. We go to 3 a week. We're going to start talking through the group of 6 conferences.
This is the time of year that I like to call the Ty romance season.
Oh, here we go.
Ty loves with his whole heart. Ty decides whether or not Ty is like, what was the show? Oh man, I remember. Okay, so it was Lorenzo Lamas, who was like a former model actor, right? He had the laser pointer where it was called, I don't know, it was called like Are You Hot or Not? Or that was the website that you can look this up as I'm speaking.
Lorenzo Lamas. Wow.
I'm almost positive it was Lorenzo Lamas. I apologize if it was not Lorenzo Lamas with the laser pointer. Look up the name of the show, Ty. We want to be accurate here. But he would decide whether or not somebody was attractive enough, and while evaluating to them, and let's be clear, not a picture, I don't believe, in person, would circle problematic areas on their body. Like, you can't be a 9 because this is what your knees look like, or
I
this
believe
is
it
what
was
your
called
chin is doing.
Are You Hot? The Search for America's Sexiest People.
And was it Lorenzo Lamas?
It was Lorenzo Lamas.
Did he have a
was the
laser
judge.
pointer?
He did have a laser pointer.
Oh
yeah.
my God. Okay.
The show was widely criticized for its superficial premise and harsh judging. You don't say.
Of problematic elements to evaluating somebody to their face with a laser pointer, but I guess it's better than doing it with a picture. You know, it's a little more honest, I guess. But this is the time of year where Ty is searching for hotness in this sport. You know, I'm just trying to, play things even-handed, Ty. I'm just trying to be as objective as possible. But Ty allows himself to be intellectually aroused by what he learns as he's studying college football. So he's taking the proverbial laser pointer to, your Indianas, your NC States, your Stanfords, your USCs, your Oregons, and he's deciding whether or not it gets his blood pumping.
I just sent you a completely ridiculous screen grab from this show.
Yes. Oh, and yeah, he's wearing the yellow tinted glasses, which I don't know if that helped him see where his laser was ending up. And look, great head of hair, attractive guy, but it was what year? It was. My guess is 1998, 2003. I don't know when. It was a different time, Ty.
Oh, it was definitely a different time. It was 2003, by the way. So
2003, Rubenstein. So. This is all a preamble and a way of saying, I guess we're building our whole preview season out of a Lorenzo Lamas theme. No?
We could do that if we want.
It's an option.
It is an option. We still have not necessarily put together our format. So there is an opening here for Lamas, should we be ever so inclined.
Yeah.
We could talk about our laser pointers.
We can come up with a laser pointer sound, even though I believe laser pointers were silent.
It was dubbed the Lorenzo Lamas flawfinder.
Oh my God. That's good branding. It's problematic thinking. It's good branding.
We can use that. We can use the Dan Rubenstein and the Ty Hildenbrandt flawfinder.
Oh my God. The flawfinder. The laser pointer. Audio laser pointer. It's a reference that everybody's going to understand immediately listening to a show in 2025, a 22-year-old reality show that is looked back upon harshly.
We're going
building
to use
a college football theme out of it. Yeah,
I want to use this now.
I do too. It came about organically. Yeah. We're ready.
This is how we put our content together. Well, welcome back, one and all. Hit follow, hit subscribe if you enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Verballers.com, VERBALLERS.com. I'm using the sing-song voice a little bit more just for you, Dan Rubenstein.
Yep.
That is where you can go get access to the shows a little bit early without the ads, playing the games. We're working on the games. Those are going to be coming up here as we get a little bit closer to the season.
Hey, real quick, it'd be great if you could consider subscribing to the YouTube channel down below. It really helps us out.
I wanted to do this episode, though, for a couple years. We haven't had a chance to do it, but finally we gave ourselves a bit of an opening here where we can bring our friend Tim Murray on. Genuinely our friend in the desert.
Of course.
Tim Murray works for VSiN, also the host of the VSiN College Football Betting Podcast. We have had questions about this. I can't even tell you how many years running. People asking us, bring a betting guy on. Bring somebody who understands sports gambling, understands lines, understands that side of the business. I understand. I know there is a balance that we need to walk when we do an episode like this because we have a good chunk of our listeners who don't care at all about college football betting. We also have a great number of people who do.
Correct.
Most of the people who listen are probably somewhere in the middle, but we have always taken the tact on this show that it's useful information. Whether you bet or not, doesn't matter to us, but point spreads, win totals, things of that nature, it's useful information. It helps guide the conversation. That's why we've brought it up on this show quite literally every year when we have previewed teams, every year when we have previewed games dating back to 2008. We just think it's
an
useful.
interesting part of the sport that would be silly to fully ignore. Yeah.
It would be silly to ignore it. So we've incorporated that into the way that we cover the sport. And over the course of many years, we've gotten a variety of questions as to what influences point spreads. How should I go about betting? Is a letdown look-ahead sandwich really a real thing that we should pay attention to, or is it just these two idiots coming up with the soundbite to play on the podcast?
Sure.
Stuff like that. We're going to frame it up. We're going to pose it to Tim here over the next hour or so. We're going to do a little bit of a gambling preview, but we're not going to go too deep in the weeds that it's going to put you off if that's not your cup of tea. If that makes sense.
It does.
All right, Dan. Joining us now, he's our friend in the desert. I don't know how else to classify this guy. He's our friend in the desert. Tim Murray, one of the affable hosts on the VSiN network, was on stage with us, I believe, when we did a show in DC.
Yeah.
DC, yeah, because he's formerly Annapolis.
Yeah, man, great memory, guys.
Of course.
Tim Murray, how goes Vegas, my friend?
Vegas is good. Yeah, it's kind of crazy to believe that I've been out here going on 5 years.
Wow, has it been that long?
Yeah, it has. Packed up the old Subaru in the middle of the pandemic and drove across country, and we've been here ever since. So I still remember jumping on stage with you fellas in front of a packed house down there in DC, and I still remember being on the set at NBC Sports Washington, and my mentions started going nuts because you guys at the back end of one of your podcasts had your army tell me to stop being a coward and go to the Muhlenberg-Salisbury game. And I could not understand for the life of me why my mentions were going nuts. But, I mean, that's just the power of the solid verballers there, man. You guys tell them to do something, they'll do it.
I mean, at the end of this interview, if you've got a secret verbal that you'd like to throw out, this is a courtesy that we'll extend to you as one of our preferred guests here on the program.
I will have to think of it. I do wonder. I am wearing my solid verbal hat.
Looks beautiful.
And this little ditty has made its rounds. I brought it to the Smurf turf when I was doing the sidelines for the Potato Bowl. I did wear it last week when I got a great tour of the San Jose State facilities just a couple of days ago. I did not take a picture on the field there, and but this bad boy has made its ways around. It's gone to Disneyland, so it's my number one hat right now, boys. I'll just say that it's my number one hat.
Wow.
Merch.solidverbal.com for those of you listening at home, watching along on YouTube. Yes, you can go and get yours. Available in many different colors. We wanted to bring you on, Tim, because, as we build to the start of the college football season, and as Dan and I are just in throes of recording some of our previews, we wanted to at least reference. We wanted to at least make mention of what's going on in the gambling world, mindful of the fact that we've got some listeners who care a great deal about it, others who couldn't care less. But our standpoint here on the show has always been that it's useful information. Going way back when we first started this thing, we would always talk about point spreads in reference to games that were upcoming, win totals before the season, just as a guide for how Vegas was thinking about some of these teams that we were going to talk about. So we wanted to bring you on as sort of our trusted expert here to give us, I don't know, that side of things as you see them right now, because you, of course, are a podcaster and a successful host in your own right. What are the betting markets telling you right now? High level, key themes, key topics, things that maybe you expected, others that maybe you didn't. What are the betting markets telling you about the college football season in 2025?
I would say one of the early themes in the betting market has been the love for Clemson. This is a team that I know friend of your show, Bill Conley, in his SP Plus, has let us know that this is the number one team in returning production. And I would say one of the early themes, at least from the betting market, is that, Clemson is live to win the national championship. Now, I want to put this into perspective. They're not the betting favorite to win the national title, but when I look at some of the odds that are out there, guys, they have been one of the biggest movers. They've moved from as high as 20-1 earlier this summer, now down around 12 or 14-1. You look at their odds to win the conference championship. That was a bet that I made, I believe, at plus 160. And now I understand, some people might know exactly what I'm talking about. To put that into perspective, what does plus 160 mean? Well, it means if you put down $10 and you won your bet, you win $16 and you're $10 back, right? You're not just giving that there. Laying juice, meaning they are the favorite, would mean if they were minus 115, you'd put down $11.50 to win $10. So it's all fractionally based if you're looking at it from a future standpoint. And then, you get into the long shots, right? You might see plus 10,000. Well, what does that mean? It means you put down $100, you win $10,000. So that's kind of how it all plays out. So back to your initial questions, Clemson has been one of the movers for sure. When I look at their odds to win the ACC, their odds to win the national championship, and another one of the kind of interesting things, in my opinion, heading into this year is I think last year maybe opened up the eyes a little bit more in that it is more wide open than we thought. We had a stretch from a betting standpoint where it felt like there was not much, air quotes, value in the futures market. There's no long shots. Now you could do a long shot to make, to win their conference, whatever it may be. But I think Ohio State is an 8, Notre Dame is a 7, making it to the national championship game a year ago, I think has opened up the eyes that, hey, maybe there aren't super teams right now. And maybe Ohio State was, and they just got knocked off twice during the regular season. But I think when you look at the odds board right now, there is no, peak Alabama or peak Georgia, if that makes sense. Ohio State's your betting favorite, but they're still at 5-1. I think back to, I think it was the 2020 season when Alabama was just a juggernaut and they won the national championship. And they were 5-1 preseason. I was like, that's a steal. Right now, Ohio State and Texas are both your co-favorites. But what's interesting, as you guys know, and as your listeners know, they play each other in week 1. So right. One of their odds is going to shift in week 1, both one down and one up, right? And then I think too, what is also interesting, and I'm sure you guys have discussed, I've discussed it ad nauseum on my podcast, is look, you look at Ohio State, Texas, Georgia, Oregon, Bama, Notre Dame. If you want to go a little further down, Michigan, Ole Miss, a lot of uncertainty at the quarterback position, right? So I think that's kind of interesting to me from a gambling standpoint is, I think this year feels wide open and the odds kind of indicate that it has the potential to be pretty wide open this year.
Has there been anything different about this offseason, either because of portal stuff or because year 2 of a 12-team playoff? You mentioned the wide open nature of last season and the sort of novel, like people didn't know what to expect out of how teams were going to look heading into and during a 12-team playoff. This is the first post-12-team playoff offseason. Have you noticed anything different about this offseason? You mentioned, obviously, Clemson as a big favorite on the conference and national level, but has the rhythm of the offseason been at all different with regard to, I guess, futures and the way people are looking at the season?
Yeah, I just talking to folks in my world, I do feel like, I don't want to say hesitancy. And look, there's some sharp guys that I trust that are firing away right away, but I do feel like they've kind of wanted to let the dust settle a little bit. And, what's interesting too is I've gotten to know people on the other side of the counter, right? The people who are putting these up. And they've gotten better at it, and I'll give you an example. And look, it might have just been a one-off and who knows, but Indiana was as high as 200-1 to just make the playoff last year. And now I think when you look at the odds board, guys, to make the playoff odds, there aren't a ton of teams in that realm. Now, look, if you want to bet Stanford or Purdue at 200 to 1 to make the playoff, Godspeed, but you think about an Indiana team whose win total was 5.5 a year ago. And, now we look back on it, we're like, wow, that was a great bet. Nobody really believed it. But I'll say this, a lot of people anticipated them to have a pretty good season. When you looked at the schedule, when you looked at the track record of Cignetti, the pieces they were bringing in. But just for a comparison's sake, Indiana, I had one listener send me a ticket slip of him betting him at 200 to 1. I had someone from DraftKings Sportsbook on my podcast tell me that it was 100 to 1. These are the teams that are 100 to 1 to make the playoff. Jacksonville State, Wyoming, Buffalo, Bowling Green, Troy. Like it's the kind of the long shots out of the G5. So I do wonder if the odds makers are being a little bit more cautious on those long shots to make the playoffs, because now that we've seen how it played out, guys, you can see in Indiana make the college football playoff as that long shot. So, when you look at the odds board, at least at DraftKings right now, and I think that's the only book that has to make the playoff odds out there, you're looking at very few Power 4 teams that have 100 to 1 or longer odds. And the teams that are all kind of in that ballpark, as I mentioned, Stanford, who's believed to be, maybe a 3-win football team. Purdue with Barry Odom coming in. That was a terrible P4 team a year ago. Wake Forest, they've got a new, sheriff in town. So there's not a lot of P4 teams in that 100 to 1 or longer odds. And I think that's a adjustment to what we saw last year after Indiana made their magical run to the playoff.
Well, you sort of speak of the uncertainty of not knowing what Cignetti and Indiana are going to do. It's obviously much more difficult given how much rosters change. Coaches, it seems like they're changing a little bit less as the sport sort of morphs into a newer version of itself. Perhaps, maybe, this is a year, 17 power conference coaches are going to get fired. Who knows? But have you noticed any interesting trends in terms of either how sharps bet or what the conversation is around in terms of how people who wager on college football approach the timing of how they bet? Are they waiting a certain number of weeks to figure out what teams are or aren't? What does the new world of college football mean for people trying to evaluate who is and isn't good?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think they're all kind of, adjusting on the fly as we all do. What value should we put on a coordinator change? When you think to Ohio State, for example, they're 5 to 1 to win the national championship. They're loaded from a roster standpoint, but they've got a quarterback who's never taken really a meaningful snap in Julian Sayin, or it's going to be Lincoln Kienholz, who, Bobby Carpenter, former Ohio State linebacker, was on my pod, and he said, look, this kid's really talented, and, maybe it's not as locked down as you think. And the fact that, Ohio State a year ago had arguably the best coordinator tandem in college football with Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles, and they're both gone. So it's like, how much do you put into that? But then also how much you just put into the stock that Ohio State's been recruiting at an elite level, and they arguably have the two most talented players in college football, in Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith. It's an interesting, dynamic when you think of it from that standpoint. So yeah, I think, as you mentioned, Dan, the sharp guys, where are they looking to bet? I'll give you an example. I am a Notre Dame fan. I think all of you guys know that. But I don't tend to bet on Notre Dame all that often. But there was one shop out there that had CJ Carr at 75 to 1 to win the Heisman Trophy. And if you followed just kind of closely to that team, you felt like he's probably going to be the starting quarterback for Notre Dame. And it's not locked down yet. Kenny Minchie could ultimately take the job. But I bet it at 75 to 1 because I was under the assumption that Steve Angeli was probably going to transfer, and he ultimately did. So I think there's also, trying to read the tea leaves and kind of jump the gun a little bit on, all right, where are we going to see this? I'll say this real quickly, though. I think it happens more so in college basketball, where the portal movements, one player makes such a drastic difference in college basketball and can shift the odds. So I do know some sharp guys from the college basketball front that are trying to kind of predict where certain players might ultimately go in the transfer portal and try to get ahead of that, because you're going to see significant line movement. For example, I know I'm kind of going all over the place, but when you see a Kevin Durant get traded in the NBA, I mean, that massively shifted the betting market. Houston right now is the second favorite to win the NBA championship now that Kevin Durant's on their roster. A little bit lower down, Desmond Bane, he gets traded from Memphis to Orlando. And while the casual fan of this podcast probably doesn't even know who Desmond Bane is, but those odds were cut in half, according to one odds maker, I think from like 40-1 down to 20-1. It just doesn't really happen that way in football, right? I mean, yes, quarterbacks are vitally important and a team gets, a particular player in the portal, but you're not going to see enormous shifts based off of one player. And I think that's what's interesting too, is, now that we're here in this portal era, there were a lot of folks early on, right, that were fading Colorado in the early Coach Prime years with the assumption of, this isn't going to work. And look, they've gone over their win total both years out of Colorado. So, I think everybody's kind of trying to learn on the fly and what it ultimately means. And I think right now, famous last words, I think there's a little bit more understanding of how it works. And then you look at a team, like I mentioned, Clemson, they did dip their toe into the portal a little bit, right? But what is the biggest thing that is working in Clemson's favor? It's they went out, they added a big-time D coordinator in Tom Allen, and they're number one in the country in returning production. They've got a quarterback in Cade Klubnik that is believed to be the best returning quarterback in college football.
How much do you believe in historical data? Because again, we're looking at futures, right? So we could pull up that, let's just take Dabo and Clemson as the example, that Dabo Swinney is, 12-4 hitting the over for Clemson's win total during his career. How much of historical data do you actually care about? Do you have a threshold that and I'm not even talking about wagering yourself. I'm just saying that you care to talk about because you think it's important for your audience. And how much do you just go year by year? This is what their schedule is. This is what their roster is. This is what the new coordinator is. Do you care about historical data? Or if, somebody is, Kirk Ferentz has been there for so long that you're like, man, that sample size is crazy. He's 23-3, not hitting, the win total. Or I guess not hitting, that would be missing the win total, however you want to phrase it. Do you care, or is there some value, little value, a ton of value? Where do you come down?
Well, I think there is some value. Now, there are also weird trends, right? Oh, on every October 27th, Alabama covers the point spread. That is just ridiculous. Yeah. It's kind of fun fodder for social media. You think about this random ass thing with the Tyrese Halliburton torn Achilles. Well, that Jason Tatum, Damian Lillard, and Tyrese Halliburton all wear zero.
All zero, okay,
well, what do I do with that? Nothing. But I'll say this, Dan, is for example, I think looking at Marcus Freeman real quickly. Now it's a little bit different because they're going to be a favorite in every single game this year. But if you look at so far through his first 4 years at Notre Dame, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but he is fantastic as an underdog against the spread. He's fantastic in close point spreads. But as we all know, and I'm sure Dan reminds Ty regularly,
you don't have to say,
they did lose to Northern Illinois.
You can just sort of nod.
They did lose to Marshall.
Make like a hand motion.
They lost
something.
to a terrible Stanford team in year number one. And you look at some of the games that have been a little bit too close for comfort early on in his career. Now, there's the caveat. He was a young head coach. Is he learning on the fly? Is he going to start to take care of business more regularly? You started to see that at the end of last season where they were covering at a very strong clip. So, yeah, I do look at some historical data. I'll give you another interesting one. Diego Pavia. If you look at him as a starting quarterback of Vanderbilt, I know he made some, braggadocious comments because that's just who Diego Pavia is. But I think in the gambling community, he's kind of looked at as like this godlike figure because last year at Vanderbilt, he was 8-2 against the spread as an underdog. And then the two games, guys, that Vanderbilt was favored in, they lost to Georgia State and they did not cover against Ball State. So this is a team in Vanderbilt that clearly kind of punches up in their weight class. Now, this is the last thing I'll say about this. odds makers aren't dummies, right? They're going to adjust and they're going to realize, all right, these particular teams maybe thrive in this dog role, and you tend to have to pay the tax. So, as last year went on, I believe I remember correctly, they did not cover. There was one game that Vanderbilt did not cover, and I felt like everybody was jumping on Vanderbilt and became kind of a popular underdog. So to answer your question, Dan, I do think historical data can certainly play a positive, especially if you're looking at how do they fare as an underdog, how do they fare as a big favorite. For example, I was reading through Phil Steele's magazine, and there's a pretty good situational spot, as you guys like to say, sandwich spot.
Yep.
And when you look at Iowa State, they play Farmageddon over in Ireland. They don't take a bye. They come home. They're going to play South Dakota prior to the Cyhawks. So a really good sandwich spot. And then what Phil Steele pointed out from a historical data point is that Iowa State is 3-10 against the spread against FCS opponents. So they tend to take those FCS foes a little bit more lightly, right? Maybe it's a glorified scrimmage, whatever it's going to be. So recognizing that, Iowa State historically has not blown out FCS opponents. And then on the flip side, you look at someone like Kirk Cignetti, guys, who last year really knew the point spread. And I believe they covered every single game outside of week 1 when they were a favorite. They were, covering the number and then some on a regular basis. So, recognizing coaches' trends, coaches will never say it, but they know the point spread, right? And they and sometimes there's coaches out there who want to make sure they take care of business.
Wow.
Look, we're doing a show here, Tim. Dan and I tend to be emotional when we are making our picks.
No.
Our picks should not be taken as gospel because clearly if you've listened to this show over the years, you know that I've had a bit of a bad run, let's say, over the last couple of years with respect to making my picks. But what do you think when you hear us talk about things like letdown look-ahead sandwiches? Because if you go by the solid verbal, it's a thing. It's something that matters.
Body blow.
It's something that matters. All of these little, inventions. These are things that we've come up with that our audience tends to gravitate towards. You talk to actual bettors, which I have. They look at you like you got two heads. So what do you think, as obviously a big fan of college football, but also somebody who is very steeped in this world of professional, actual gamblers who pay their bills with this sort of thing?
Now, let me preface it. I am not a pro bettor. I'm like you guys. I have a job. I work for a gambling network, but I am not a professional bettor. There are people who are much smarter than me when it comes to that. But I want to say this. I am a big situational handicapper. I think it is massive in college football. And I know I keep bringing it up, but when you think back to last year, did I think Notre Dame would lose to Northern Illinois? Absolutely not. Did I think they would cover a 4-touchdown spread a week removed from beating Texas A&M on the road? No, I didn't. I thought that was a massive letdown spot. I do believe in situational handicapping. And look, I did a podcast a week ago, guys, where I spent 15 minutes looking at early potential situational angles, and not all of them are going to come home. I'll give you an example. How about this spot in early season? You've got Arkansas on the road at Ole Miss, and then 2 weeks later, they host Notre Dame. Friend of mine who works at the Action Network, Colin Wilson, lives in Fayetteville, and he said they're already talking about Notre Dame's trip to Arkansas. In the middle of that, they have to go on the road to take on Memphis.
Right.
I mean, that's a huge game for Memphis. You're getting a Power 4 team into your home stadium, and it's a great spot. Now, once again, odds makers realize that there's going to be a tax that you have to pay. But, there's a lot of different people who go about betting very differently. And that's the beauty of sports gambling, right? I tend to like situational handicapping, right? Desperation spot, all of that. Now, you can't go just all in on one particular angle, but there's a lot of people out there that are numerically based. I mentioned Bill Conley. He's got his system, his spits out his numbers, and that's what he's going to bet. He's going to try to find his edges based off of numbers. But I'm going to, more often than not, look at a situation that I look to bet. And then, and lastly, guys, the reason I got into sports betting, believe it or not, it was there was a segment in DC with a radio host that I work with. His name's Kevin Sheehan, and he is very close with Scott Van Pelt. So he and Scott Van Pelt bet very similarly, and Van Pelt does his winners, every Thursday night on his show, and it's always going to be dogs. Very rarely will he pick a favorite, but what led me to this kind of unique way of betting was calling it a stinky line, a little fishy line, right? And you look at it and you're like, that doesn't seem to feel accurate. And then you kind of put your finger up to the wind and you're like, all right, what are people saying about this game? And everybody seems to be on one side, and that's the old contrarian betting, right? You go the opposite way, So look, contrarian betting, situational betting, betting based off your numbers. If there was something that made us hit at 100%, we'd all be doing it, and we'd all be living on islands out there. So, however you want to do it. But I've certainly texted Ty a time or two and be like, Ty, wouldn't go there. Wouldn't go there.
Yep.
That's a very short, suspicious line. And sometimes
You
you're
like
right.
leaning into the stink or avoiding the stink.
Embracing the stink is something that I like to say. If the line seems wrong, you steer into it. You grab that stinky line. So,
right.
Look, there's so many different theories of how people want to bet. But those are two of the ways that I do bet: the stinky line and also kind of the contrarian sandwich spot. Maybe I stole it from you guys, but my producer last Saturday or last year, on my Saturday tailgate show, created a segment. We called it the Murray Delicatessen, and we talked about sandwich spots. So
love it.
There's angles always out there to take a look at, from a betting standpoint.
For your consideration on any podcast player, search Solid Verbal, find us, and hit follow or subscribe. It's just that easy.
Just for our audience here, which plays in our Run the Board game, which is a pick'em game against the spread out on our Patreon for ballers.com. Not that it needs any extra plug here, but what is your formula when you are determining which side of a bet you want to go on? I mean, obviously there are some spots that, as we've discussed here, jump out to you, whether it's a stinky line or a situational spot. These things tend to be fairly obvious, but for games that aren't, if you're just looking at a point spread and one team is favored by 7 and it feels about right, what are like those points of information that you would use to guide you to help pick one side over the other?
Yeah, I mean, look, you don't have to bet every game. Obviously, that is the beauty of college football is we have so many games out there that you don't have to bet every side. But when you're playing in a pick'em pool or something like that, like you guys do with your listeners, yeah, sometimes you just kind of trust your gut, maybe a little bit, look that way. But yeah, I mean, look, more often than not, I wouldn't say I'm a blind underdog bettor, but I like to grab the points as much as I possibly can. But there's going to be spots where you're going to want to lay the chalk. So yeah, it's as you'll hear all the time, it's case by case basis, however it's going to be. But yeah, I think when you look at a point spread, I don't know if I have a hard and fast breakdown of where I go. Look, there are a lot of people in my line of work that make their own power ratings. Right. I do not. I trust in what odds makers put out there and kind of decipher. I think also too, one of the interesting things, kind of how you go about betting, is I've historically, as I look back at my bets, my week one tends to be one of my worst weeks. I don't know what it is. I think I need to kind of get a little bit more information under my belt. And I also think too, the overreaction to what you saw last is such a commonplace, in from bettors. And it's not just college football, it's all sports, right? You see a team win, 42-0 one week, and all right, they're going to be the betting favorite. And then they're an underdog. And you're like, wait, that's wrong. And then they go out and they get blown out. You got to look into games. You got to, I know Phil Steele does this a lot. He looks at, the teams that are probably going to regress, right? Is the turnover margin, out of whack one way or the other? Oh my gosh, this team is minus 14 in the turnover margin. If they just don't turn the ball over, they might win this game. And you do see that certainly from time to time. So I think to kind of go back to Ty, how you go about it and why I feel like I tend to be successful as the year goes on. I think looking at some of that data, what's the outlier here? Did this team win, a game where they were outgained by 200 yards, or were they +4 in the turnover margin and they won by 2 points, probably indicating probably shouldn't have won that game. Do we utilize that to our advantage as a bettor? So I think that's why I think I tend to be better, certainly as the year goes on. And then lastly, I'll say this, and I know you guys have done your bowl pick'ems forever. I think I've had a successful bowl season like 5 or 6 straight years. I mean, bowl season motivation is such a massive thing in these smaller bowls. Now it gets challenging because, not that long ago when the portal wasn't as rampant as it was, you would look at a MAC school playing a P4 school and you'd be like, we're going to take the MAC school because they're motivated to play a P4 school. Now, a lot of those schools, their best players are all in the portal trying to go to P4 teams. So it's not as, cut and dry as maybe it used to be. But yeah, bowl season, you talk about motivation, man. That is a driving factor. There is no doubt. Bowl season is a clear motivational handicap for sure. I mean, you talk to pro bettors, they just completely throw out their numbers more often than not. Now the playoff is different, obviously, but they just eliminate their numbers because it's impossible to know who's going to be, geared up to be in the Frisco Bowl on a Tuesday night before Christmas.
It's so funny to hear you talk about your tendencies because I find for myself, I'm the exact opposite. And I've joked about it on this show before. I am a low information bettor. I do really well in September. I do really well the first 2 weeks of the season. If I were to shut everything down after September, I would be much better off for it.
You're in your own head, Ty.
It's what
Paralysis
it is.
by
You're
overanalysis.
emotional.
Yeah.
As you said it. You can't get over what you saw last. You got to remove from the brain what you saw last Saturday and recognize that there's going to be, whether it's, I'm a big believer in, regression, whether it's positive or negative, things tend to come back. And, when you think at a team like now, there are teams that defy that logic. And once again, I remember, a lot of us in the betting world were continuing to try to go at Signetti last year, being like, all right, we're gonna get him here. Maryland catching 7.
Gotta end soon.
Yeah. And then, they would cover with ease there. So yeah, it's I mean, that's the beauty of gambling, man. And even if you're not a bettor, I just think looking at the point spread tends to be so fascinating. You'd be like, what was the point spread in this one? Oh, wow. That's pretty interesting that they were a touchdown underdog and they're winning by 21 points,
It's almost like you're saying, I mean, you said emotional, but like everybody knows this about Ty. He's romantic, right?
Of course.
Ty loves with his whole heart. So if he sees Kansas State win a big game in week 3 or week 4, come week 7 or 8, Ty is just like, I still believe, right? I still think, even if there's 3 weeks consecutively of evidence to the contrary, Ty's like, I'm going to fight for this relationship.
Avery Johnson's hair just it's romantic.
It's
his hair alone
it
is romantic.
I'm curious. You have the data. Everybody has the data. If you want to look up who's good against the spread, who's not good against the spread, you look at the teams who tend to be terrible against the spread over the course of a season, especially once you're 8, 9, 10, 11 weeks in or whatever. And those teams tend to be the ones who looked good last year, and what you mentioned, having a short memory here, looked good last year and sort of fell off a cliff this year, especially on defense, it seems. Is there a point of the year where people who do this professionally say to themselves, okay, I know we had high hopes for blank, but it's now week this, and we have to stop. We have to be real and live in the moment now.
I'm pulling up, so I track every one of my bets.
Like last year it was Arizona, right? Arizona, we're like, well, they got the best receiver, they got the quarterback back, and they were god-awful against the spread last year as they collapsed with the new coach.
Well, I'll give you another one that was terrible against the spread was Liberty. Liberty, a year removed from their run. Oregon destroyed Liberty. I mean, they ruined them, beating them in that bowl game. But they were a team that we all saw make the college football playoff, believed to be just that much better than everyone in Conference USA. And last year they went 3-9 against the spread. And they were a team that, I fell for it. I fell for, I think mid-season, I ended up betting them to win the conference because I was thinking they're just better. But
Right.
sometimes, it doesn't work out that easily, right? There's not always going to be that positive regression in that regard. But, it is worth noting, right? You look at a team like Florida State, for example, and, you got the comments from Thomas Castellanos as he now heads to Florida State from Boston College. And, last year, guys, Florida State opens up in Dublin, loses to Georgia Tech. And then that number, I want to say, opened, I think, as high as 23 in favor of Florida State against Boston College. And I want to say went all the way down to 16, and Boston College won the game outright, right? So Florida State was one of those teams where the market just couldn't adjust them fast enough. And
Right.
if you were just blindly fading Florida State, you were making a ton of money. And then on the flip side, we mentioned Indiana. Indiana ended up being a team that just continued to cover, and they ended up going, 9-4 against the spread. And I'm looking at it right now. They had the best cover margin in college football. They covered games. So once again, let's say the point spread is 7. They covered games by an average of 12.8 points per game, meaning a 7-point spread, on average, they beat that spread. They won by 20 points. So that just tells you that the market was just off on Indiana. So you'll see it all the time. And this is where I'm a bit stubborn when it comes to this. When you start to see the trends on Twitter, and you start to hear from your neighbor and he's telling you that, so-and-so has covered 6 straight games, I'm like, all right, it's time to get off, right? It's like when your parents started doing something when you were in middle school and you're like, whoa, that's no longer cool. So it is kind of funny where that's just my brain, where once I start to see the people kind of pointing out a statistical trend from an ATS standpoint, that's where I'm like, all right, I got to get off, or I got to go on the other side. So once again, that's just how my kind of crazy brain works. But yeah, I mean, that's something too, where, odds makers have power ratings and they live by those power ratings, and they're going to adjust, obviously, but it's hard to overreact to one game. So Florida State, for example, they go 12-0 in 2023. They get curb stomp in the bowl game, but okay, they didn't have anyone playing. And then we had no idea that they were going to be that tragically bad last year. And once again, not only did they go 2-10 straight up, but I think they went 2-8-2 against the spread, because the market is trying to adjust fastly, but they don't want to overreact to what we saw. Okay, they lost to Georgia Tech in Ireland. All right, no big deal. Let's see how they do against Boston College. Ooh, they lost to Boston College. Now we have to readjust and change our power rating. So they're trying to change on the fly, but they don't want to change too much, because then, sharp guys might come in and say, you guys shouldn't have done this. You overreacted this too much, and we're going to, pound you on the other side.
Are there ratings? Are there people whose power ratings are more accurate over time, just in terms of like, okay, this is my model, this is my algorithm, this is my system, or whatever, and it has proved to be a more successful view of who is and who isn't trustworthy in college football than my competitors?
I mean, every pro bettor out there is hoping that their system is got some edges, right? So I don't know. I mean, look, a lot of pro bettors, we don't even know who they are, but there's a lot of people out there that, I'm not going to name them, but there's plenty of handicappers. I have a bunch on my show that they have respected ratings, and sometimes there's going to be a big discrepancy in their power rating versus the market, and that's going to lead them to a bet. So I don't know if I can name you one particular person that,
well, even like the odds makers, right? The odds makers have they have ratings, they have rankings where it's just like, yeah, Caesars or whoever was way lower on Arizona State than everybody else, and that paid off.
And you'll see it, Dan, when you look at different books that are out there. My studio is inside the Circus Sportsbook. They're thought to be probably one of the sharpest books in the world, if not the sharpest book in the world. So, you look around, and that's what's kind of interesting. And you'll hear people like on VSiN, we always say, always shop around, right? And, this is something too, if you're just getting into gambling and, a $20 a game better, whatever it is, whatever you feel, it doesn't matter. But I always say this, always look around. We as a society will drive an extra 10 miles if I can save, 2 cents on gas.
Right.
When in reality, probably driving that far just was a waste of money.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, it's in our minds that I've got to get the cheapest price out there. But when it comes to gambling, I feel like people are like, well, what's the difference between 7.5 and 8? It's like, well, over time, that's going to come back and bite you in the butt.
Mm-hmm.
So you always look around. Don't just settle because it's more convenient. Get as many outs as possible.
And that's a good life philosophy. Yeah.
When you think about, Dan, your state in Illinois, or Ty, your state in Pennsylvania, there's so many books out there, whether it be DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, et cetera, that just look at all of them. More often than not, guys, they're going to have the same number. You're not going to see it off all that much, but there are going to be differences in the futures market. When you look at, hey, I like, a long shot Heisman bet that I made. Is it going to come home? Probably not. But I bet Devin Dampier to win the Heisman Trophy as he goes to Utah. He's 100-1 at DraftKings. He's like 50-1 everywhere else. Right. Don't just settle and be like, well, 50-1 is the same as 100-1. No, it's doubly better. So always look around, and if you can, it's kind of tedious at times, but just check your apps and see if you can get a little bit of difference, because there's certainly a big difference between 2.5 and 3, 6.5 and 7, and if you can get that better number, certainly it's definitely worth it. And over time, while you may, I hear it all the time, well, I just laid the money line instead of, taking the points. Okay. And that's your prerogative, and maybe you'll hit more often than not. But as you continue to do this time and time again over years and years and years, you're going to get bit in the butt if you're just only betting the money lines as opposed to taking the points. What's
the least efficient way to wager on college football? Props, parlays, what are you just like, hey, this is an insane
teasers.
sport.
Oh, here it is. Teasers. Never tease college football.
Okay.
Look, in the NFL, teasers have actually, over time, become a profitable endeavor.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. I'll give you kind
define teaser, by the way, for the people.
Okay, so thank you. A teaser is when you utilize points and you can manipulate the line. So your standard teaser is 2-team 6-point teaser. And in the NFL, these have become profitable, and sportsbooks have adjusted accordingly, because in the NFL, the margins are so razor tight and the games are going to tend to fall in there. So in the NFL, if you're teasing, the belief is you want to get through what are key numbers, right? Key numbers are 3 and 7. Those are the most key numbers. That's what games land on the most. So, for example, I'll just use random teams. If the Philadelphia Eagles are a 1.5-point underdog against the Kansas City Chiefs, you can utilize a 6-point teaser and take the Philadelphia Eagles, move them through 3, move them through 7, and now you've got the Eagles as a 7.5-point underdog. But it's not that easy. You got to find another dance partner, right? So you got to find another team that you feel like maybe the Bills are a 7.5-point favorite against the Dolphins. So we're going to take the Bills and we're going to move them through 7 and 3, move them down. And now I've got the Bills minus 1.5 and the Eagles plus 7.5, and both have to hit in order for me to win my bet. So in college football, go ask an odds maker. They'll tell you the answer. They'll tell you never tease in college football. There's too much volatility in college football. So, look, parlays are fun. We like to put together our 5-leg parlay, and try to hit on a big cash. And if that's what you want to do, you're recreational, to each their own. I'm not going to tell you not to do it, but for a teaser, it's just, there's so much volatility out there in college football where it's not going to be worth it to utilize it. And when you look at the juice that you have to pay, for example, in the NFL, juice meaning what the house's take is going to be. Right. In the NFL, they've moved the juice of standard 2-team 6-point teasers to anywhere from like minus 120 to minus 140. They don't want you to play them. That's why they've moved it that way. If you go play like a college football teaser, there's like no juice. It's like even money. it's a hint from the books being like, sure, we'll take your money on this because this won't come home
Right.
more often than not. So look, books love when you play parlays because it's harder to hit parlays, right? You got to hit 4 legs, 5 legs, 6 legs. Look, I'm not going to lie. I play them from time to time, some money line parlays. I put together favorites, but in college football, you guys know it as well as anybody. The weeks that we expect there to be no chaos, there's utter
always
chaos.
The quiet ones, right? It's always the quiet ones.
Yeah. Do not tease college football. That's my PSA. Do not tease college football.
I don't know if this is a fallacy. I don't know if there's actual value in it. Do you find it to be the case in the conversations you have that hyper-focusing on smaller conferences is valuable, or is football so big that the people who truly care, so that in this the bookmakers, the odds makers, like they know what they're talking about with the Conference USA lines and the Mountain West lines and FCS lines, or is there actual some of these games sort of exist in the shadows mathematically, and if you really lock in on a smaller conference, you can succeed?
I think there is some validity to that. If you are only focusing on the MAC, I think you might find yourself having an edge. Now, I think it's more applicable to college basketball because there's so many teams,
right? And
odds makers are just going to trust their power ratings and probably not look at situational spots. If you are focused in on the NEC or the Patriot League, I think there is an edge to be had in college basketball for sure. I think there still is the potential to look around in the MAC, in the CUSA, if you want to divulge in the FCS. FCS numbers move very quickly, meaning they're going to trust the bets that come in a lot, and they're going to move those numbers rapidly.
Accordingly, yeah.
Sharp money. Look, I don't move lines, right? You guys don't move lines. The guys that are
Speak
respected.
for yourself. Yeah.
Well, that's true. I can't speak for Dan. Ty, I don't think you.
I move markets, Ty. Everybody knows this.
But yeah, it's interesting. And look, that's also something to note, right? You'll hear people like me or others talk about like sharp action that is coming in. When a line moves, that is typically sharp action. The public, now not all the time, but more often than not, the sharp action is the one that moves lines, right? The public bettor is not going to move line. Sportsbooks are okay taking a stand. Like if they see that, 80% of recreational bettors are on, Florida State plus 12.5 against Alabama, probably not going to move that line because they're okay. They want to win. They want to beat the bettor at the end of the day. Now, if they see a bunch of bettors that they respect coming in on Florida State plus 12.5, that's when you're going to see the number move, right? So that is, I don't want to say it's a common misconception, but a lot of the time, people say, sports books want 50-50 action. That's not always true. They're going to want to take a stand, and you'll hear, like, I have odds makers on all the time, and they'll say, hey, it was a great weekend for us. We got this underdog home, or this underdog won and it blew up money line parlays. So you hear that a lot too, where you see, especially in the NFL guys, when you see like the Chiefs and the Eagles and all these very popular good teams, people just throw them into money line parlays, and when one of them loses, it tends to be a good thing for the sports book because that's going to wipe out all of these money line parlays. Because when you put together a money line parlay, right, you get a little more creative juice. All right, cool. Now I've got, Ohio State paired with Penn State, paired with Oregon. All they have to do is win these 3 games, and I'm going to bring it home at, plus 105. But when one of those teams loses, it tends to help out the sports book and wipe out those money line parlays.
You have any good stories about somebody having eyes and ears everywhere, finding out if a quarterback got dumped, finding out if a running back and his coach got in a screaming match and shoved each other, and now he might not be playing. You take your pick, a receiver and his wife or girlfriend having a baby, and now he's up all night because he's got a newborn, and maybe, fade this thing. Like, do you have stories about, sharps having those eyes and ears everywhere?
No doubt. I'll give you one. A couple years ago, I think it was 2021. Notre Dame was playing Virginia in Charlottesville, and the week prior, Brennan Armstrong got banged up, and I was just kind of speculating. I'm like, I don't think he's going to play. It's Notre Dame. It's a big game, but it's also, they still were, I think, at the time in the ACC hunt. So I was just kind of poking around and reached out to a couple folks, and they were like, "Oh yeah, he's not playing." And then you find out a little bit further down the line, I think the stories come out, like how that information, came out. So yeah, I mean, if you can beat the market on information, like there are some really good folks out there that are just ruthless trying to find out information, having sources inside, training facilities. I don't, unfortunately.
Lecture halls.
I wish
Come
I
on,
did.
you got to get the kids in on this. Who's in a walking boot?
I know, but yeah, every once in a while, I remember, and this is with college basketball, I want to say it was like information that was like readily available, but it was a Patriot League team, American University. I think their best player had played like illegally in, Europe or something like that. And he was suspended due to NCAA rules, and the market just didn't realize it. And I'm like,
Ooh.
did they know that their best player is just not playing today? Like the information was just out there. And, sometimes you just, they're asleep at the wheel. Not so much in college football, but yeah, I mean, I think if you have, sometimes you just get lucky and you get that information. I'm trying to think of some others that you have some good closing line value. But yeah, I do remember that Notre Dame Virginia game. I remember going on the air and being like, I know that Brennan Armstrong's not going to play, but it's not been reported. So I kind of tried to strongly hint, be like, I don't know, guys.
Injury status
Brennan
up in the
Armstrong's
air.
A little bit banged up. He might not be playing. And then I want to say the point spread went from 7 to 14 once he officially got ruled out, before the start of the game. But hey, look, sometimes you get burned, right? You have a source that's like, this guy is definitely not going to play.
Right.
And then you're texting with people, what you're like, is he warming up? They're like, yeah, he's going to play. And you're like, oh, okay, yep, this is terrible information. So, always trust your sources and trust your information. And obviously, as much as we want to trust everything that we see on social media, it's not always going to be accurate. So yeah, be careful all the time, loading up, every dollar that you have in a bank account, because, the backup center told you information that the starting quarterback is going to be out.
The place kicker's hands have been shaking while he was drinking his smoothie. I don't know if his mental state is where it needs to be.
We
if
had
this is
so
close.
many people write in about Cam Rising last year. I remember that well. People were like, no, he's good.
Yeah,
what
he's
was
good.
That game? It was a Friday night game. It was Utah and was it Washington State or something like that? And all week, Whittingham was like, yeah, he's going to play. And then Friday night came around.
Yes, a couple years ago. Yeah. That was a big thing too, because I think this story was on the show. Somebody, I forget who told it, and forgive me, but that was also a Fox game that they were broadcasting from LA. So they didn't actually have the right and I think Kyle Whittingham kind of misled the broadcast crew, but because they weren't there, they didn't actually have eyes and ears on the team and the situation and what was going on. And so Fox felt betrayed being away from LA, that they weren't getting the full information. That might have been Petros Papadakis. I forget who it was, but that was a whole thing with Cam Rising is going to play, and then he just didn't.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I believe starting with this next round of the college football playoff, they're going to require schools to provide an availability report in advance of some of these games. So,
well, I'll say this real quickly, thinking back to this last year's playoff, right? Jeremiah Love was all sorts of banged up, right? And I probably put one of my biggest bets of the year on his under rushing yards. And I think it came home against Penn State, but he played a lot more than we expected. It was like, hey, he's going to have 4 carries. I think he had 11 or 12 carries in that game. And I think there were markets out there where it was like Jeremiah Love versus Travion Henderson, who's going to have more rushing yards, as he played Texas. And I'd loaded up on that, gave it out on my shows, and he ended up with 50 some odd yards. And Travion Henderson, if I remember correctly, they didn't really run the ball all that well against Texas. So, sometimes you think that the information you've got is good and the market's off the mark, and it just doesn't come home. That's the beauty of sports betting and sports, right? That's why we love this stuff so much. So, I hate, everyone's like, what? Give me a lock. I'm like, I'm not gonna.
Sorry, friend.
I'm not gonna do that. Like, you can. I like this bet. I've made it myself, but there's no such thing as a lock. And if you could just hit at 55%, you're doing very well. Which I know people don't like to hear. They want you to be hitting at 75%.
Well, let's close out with this. I won't ask you for your locks, but some of your favorite moves, some of your favorite lines, some things that have been of interest to you in the preseason, as I know you're every bit as deep in this as Dan and I are. What are some of the bets that you like?
Yeah, so I mean, full disclosure, I've only made a couple so far. I'm really diving into it now for win totals and stuff like that. The long shot I mentioned already is Devin Dampier, and a lot of people are going to discuss John Mateer. And look, I'm excited to see what he's going to bring to the table with his unique style of play down at Oklahoma. And maybe I'm a little bit of a hater, but I want to see it, right? I want to see him perform at the level that he performed at in, let's call it what it was, the Mountain West last year, as he goes to the best conference in college football from top to bottom. So, there's a unique aspect of, Ben Arbuckle comes with him down to Oklahoma. But, look at the odds board, guys, on John Mateer. The odds are very much baked in, and he is, when you look at, Heisman Trophy 35-1, which, if he wins it, hey man, that more power to you. That's a great bet to make. But I'm just not there yet. But I am excited about Devin Dampier, because it's a similar situation where he is coming with his offensive coordinator from New Mexico. I think it's Jason Beck.
Jason Beck, yep.
He goes up to New Mexico, goes to Utah. And look, the schedule's much more manageable for Utah as opposed to Oklahoma. Oklahoma is believed by some people to have the most difficult schedule in college football this upcoming year. So, Devin Dampier is not the polished passer that I would say John Mateer is, but you watch some of his highlights a year ago, man, that was a special player. And the level of talent that was on New Mexico's roster was not anywhere close to what Washington State was. So he's kind of the guy that I'm most intrigued about this year in college football, from an outside standpoint. Obviously, I'm intrigued by, Ty Simpson and CJ Carr and players at, the big time programs. But he's the one, guys, that I threw 100-1 bet on him. I think that's still out there at DraftKings. Once again, long shot. It was as we like to call pizza bet. It was nothing big, but that one, I'm a little bit talking out of both sides of my mouth in the sense that I'm questionable on John Mateer and I'm all in on Devin Dampier. But the SEC versus the Big 12. Let's be real, right? It's a little bit of a different ball game.
Yep, sure.
In those two particular conferences. I mentioned Clemson. Obviously, they're a team that I'm very high on. And then, the one team that I feel like, as crazy as it sounds, and it's not like they're 100-1 shot, that just people may not be discussing enough, in my opinion, is Alabama. When you look at the positional strengths that they have, I think, and I'm not saying that he's the gospel, but I think Phil Steele had them top 10 in every position outside of quarterback. And I think that's what's so fascinating about this year, guys, is if a couple of these schools hit at the quarterback position, whether it be Ty Simpson at Alabama or CJ Carr at Notre Dame or Dante Moore at Oregon, like what's the ceiling for these particular schools, right? Like they have loaded rosters, but we just don't know about the quarterback, and the quarterback's the most important position in the sport. But what if they hit? It's not like Ty Simpson was some jabroni. He was a 5-star recruit a couple of years ago. CJ Carr, high 4-star recruit. So we know recruiting rankings are hit or miss, and there's plenty of busts out there. But what I think was interesting when you look at Georgia and Bama and Notre Dame and Oregon is that they didn't really go in the portal. They didn't look all that hard. Miami did, right? They brought in Carson Beck. And, from my understanding, we had a, friend of your show, Scott Docterman, on my podcast. And he said that, Miami went hard after Mark Gronowski from South Dakota State. So Miami was clear, we need a quarterback. The other schools were kind of like, we're good.
Right.
We think we can roll with this. So going back to Bama real quickly, guys, Kalen DeBoer, it felt like maybe his stock was too high when he went down to Bama. And now doesn't it feel like the stock is like, well, this guy's got to do it. Not 4 losses is not how you do it down here in Tuscaloosa. I'm like, the roster's still loaded with talent. And Ryan Williams may be, the best wide receiver, or 1B to Jeremiah Smith's 1A. And if Ty Simpson hits with an offensive coordinator and Ryan Grubb that has worked wonders over his career, that reuniting reunion of Grubb and DeBoer, I think, needs to get a little bit more love out there. Like, look, Penn State, you went out, you got Jim Knowles. That could work out wonderfully well, and I'm not saying it won't. But I think people are overlooking the fact that Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer led Washington to the national championship game 2 years ago. Yep. And now, with more talent, we're kind of looking at Alabama as like the 8th or 9th best team in the country. So I think Alabama, I would not be surprised if they're playing in late January.
Fair.
Wonderful. Well, his name is Tim Murray. You can find him out on the VSiN network as well as the VSiN College Football Betting Podcast. Anything that I missed, Tim?
I don't think so.
I got it all.
Yeah,
okay.
Just fired up to get it going. Oh, I do. You did miss something. For those of you watching with us, you can see over my shoulder. That is my prestigious college jersey. I was an All-American, and by All-American, I played about 9 minutes a game for Muhlenberg College. But I bring this up.
I know why you're bringing this.
We're talking basketball, to be clear.
Because Ty Hildenbrandt over there lives a stone's throw away from my alma mater in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And Dan, we're doing all this, gambling chatter. And it's an important thing in gambling to pay your debts. Ty Hildenbrandt has not paid his debt.
No, I haven't.
A couple of years ago, Notre Dame played Ohio State, and Ty and I, both Notre Dame fans. And Ty was, as he's one to do, feeling good. Yeah. And he said Notre Dame's going to beat Ohio State.
They could have.
And
they
should have beat them.
Yeah.
They beat them.
They nearly had enough men on the field. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when 000s were on the board, and I was sitting there with a sourpuss on my face inside Notre Dame Stadium wearing a green T-shirt, Ohio State had beaten Notre Dame. But we had a little wager on the side where if Ohio State won the game, because I was very pessimistic about said game, that Ty Hildenbrandt would walk over to the Muhlenberg bookstore, buy a Muhlenberg basketball T-shirt, and wear it on the podcast.
Oh, Ty, come on.
I know. I didn't do
Dan Rubenstein, remind me, you are a man who has a great memory.
Yeah.
Have we seen a Muhlenberg basketball T-shirt appear on the Solid Verbal?
Unfortunately, this show has been mule-free since 2003. And I don't appreciate Ty bringing now a pretty bad reputation.
Dan,
to this
in
show.
some circles, there are, there are people, their kneecaps are broken. Things get ugly. The Murray Sportsbook is pretty kind. I'm just publicly shaming Ty.
Yeah, Ty.
So
we're talking about a college athlete here who has a lot of pride, who winning is important. Here's my final question, by the way, because you're displaying the jersey in the background here. Were you a power forward? What position did you play?
Believe it or not, I was a center.
Okay, so you're playing center for the Muhlenberg Mules, playing 9 minutes a game, but nobody can take away the fact that you were a college athlete. So to any aspiring low post player, 15, 16 years old, and they want to play, is Muhlenberg, was it D2? D3. They just want to keep that career going. What is something that they should be working on in those unseen hours in the gym? Are we talking about drop step, baby hook? Are we become a stretch 5? What is your advice to surpass your 9 minutes a game playing D3 basketball?
Well, Free throws are important.
Yeah.
I did set the record at Muhlenberg for single season worst free throw percentage. That is
What
a
was it?
fact. My junior year, I was 8 for 31 from the free throw line.
What?
25.8%. I don't know how you can equate.
Was it your hands? Was it your head? Was it your rhythm? It's all in the head.
It's all between the ears, man. And
Okay.
it's not like I was playing every game, there inside Memorial Hall. It was like the Cameron Crazies,
Right.
Let's be real. It was a smattering of students and parents inside those arenas, but it's all between the ears, man. So if you could figure out a way to I don't know if you had to go to a sports psychologist or do something like that.
Sure.
But, man, the mental side of things is vital.
I appreciate that we just spent an hour talking about how to think about and evaluate college football from somebody who could not hit 30% of his free throws.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Just making sure.
75% free throw shooter in high school, and then I got to college, and I was I did improve my senior year. I think I went 9 for 23 my senior year. So
You need
Progress.
a Gene Hackman out there with the ruler measuring it to show you visually that it's the same height and the same,
Yeah. So, I would say mentally, stay sharp between the ears. That's always helpful. I did. I will say though, my freshman year, I did lead the nation in field goal percentage,
Which was 100%.
100%, 1 for 1.
Yeah.
Perfect. So
Love to hear it.
yeah, no.
Tim Murray.
That is. I mean, look, those are things people can't take away.
That's true.
Those are factual statements, and maybe one day Ty Hilton Brandt will represent his hometown. I mean, look, it's his hometown team, Dan. I mean, it's right down the road, in the Lehigh Valley.
Here's my promise to you, Tim. Here's my promise. My promise is on one of our upcoming preview episodes, because we're in the, as I said, throes of trying to put these together now. I will run up to Muhlenberg. I will pick up a shirt. I will wear it on one of the preview episodes. I will send it off to you. I'll send you a screenshot so that you can verify, and so I can make good on my bet.
All right. Hey, look, at the end of the day, you gotta pay your debts. It'll be almost 2 years since that game. I remember sitting in the parking lot, an empty parking lot at like 1:00 in the morning after Notre Dame lost to Ohio State. And I want to say I did call the Verballer line, just being very despondent and sad that I had just witnessed it. But we press on, and we'll see what comes of it. And you got to pay your debts. Another part of gambling. Got to pay your debts.
Important life lesson from Tim Murray over at the VSiN Network. Tim, thank you for sharing your insight, your wisdom. It's always great to have you back. Thank you.
See you guys.
All right, there you go. Tim Murray calling me out.
How long of a drive is it?
It's like 10 minutes.
Okay.
It's not. I could have walked there before. I can't walk there anymore.
Muhlenberg, Mules, shirt. Let's take a look at the options all on the show together.
When we brought him on and I saw his frame with the Muhlenberg basketball jersey over his, I guess, right shoulder, I knew he was going to bring that up. I knew in my marrow he was going to bring that up. And I feel bad about it because we did make the bet and I didn't follow through. But I will definitely follow through now that he called me out on the air.
I'm looking right now. You can get 2020. There's like a bucking mule shirt made by Gildan for the mules.
Great.
It's totally good. It's totally good. I did a little bit more Lorenzo Lamas research.
Of course he did.
His lady co-host on Are You Hot was Rachel Hunter.
Rachel Hunter.
Who at one point was married to Rod Stewart. And
correct.
More affectionately this century known as Stacy's mom.
Oh.
Parenthetically has got it going on.
I did not know that.
Yes. She was the co-host of that show. And here's the Lorenzo Lamas's his filmography is an insane list of titles going back to when he was like a kid and stuff. He was in both. He was Snake Eater and Snake Eater 2: The Drug Buster. He was in Body Rock, Promises in the Dark. I can only imagine what that is, but that's Snake Eater 3: His Law. CIA Codename: Alexa. CIA 2: Target Alexa. Bad Blood, Midnight Man, Gladiator Cop, Terminal Justice, The Rage, Undercurrent, The Circuit 2, The Final Punch.
These sound like ChatGPT movies, is what they sound.
Unbelievable. Unseen Evil, Sci-Fi Fighter, Killing Cupid, 18 Fingers of Death, and he played a character named Antonio Bandana. Succubus, Hellbent. Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus, Return to Vengeance, Cathedral Canyon, Bro, What Happened, Atomic Eden, God's Club, Railroad to Hell, A Chinaman's Chance. I do not approve of that way of speaking. Las Vegas, Vietnam, The Movie. Scorpion Girl Awakening, The Movie. Real Blood, The True Beginning.
Wow.
Yeah. And Phineas and Ferb. Ghost Girls, Lucha Underground, Sharknado 3, Oh Hell No. This is great. This is okay. I don't know how we don't do this.
Are You Hot? The series was short-lived, lasting only a handful of episodes before being canceled due to low ratings and a negative reception. You don't say.
Man.
You don't say, shining a laser pointer at flaws.
The flawfinder. We got it here. All right. It's time to dial up the flawfinder. Yeah.
The flawfinder. There it is.
Okay, Mizzou, let's get a closer look.
Beautiful. Well, listen, big thanks to Tim Murray for stopping on by, sharing his insight with us. We appreciate it. We're going to go off now and record our first preview episode, if that's cool with you. That drops on Tuesday. Again, next week, a 1-episode week. Going to get our intro to the 25 season. The following week, we're going to flip the switches, go to 3, start talking about the G5/G6 conferences, and then I guess go into the ACC the following week.
Yes, absolutely.
So a lot is coming your way here. We appreciate having you beside us. Verballers.com is where you can go to support. If nothing more, hit follow or subscribe so that you don't miss any of those episodes. For that guy over there, our Lorenzo Lamas aficionado, Dan Rubenstein. For myself, Ty Hildenbrandt, we'll catch you all next week. In the meantime, stay solid.
Peace.